Who is he? Claude Moreland, born November 5th, 1937. Born in a farmhouse, southern Illinois. Grew up in Bureau County near Princeton, Illinois. Graduated from Wynette High School, Indiana Wesleyan University, Northern Baptist Seminary. July 14, 1957, married Eloise. God blessed us with 4 tremendous children. Came to Aledo, first time in January 1967. Wondered how in the world they could grow anything on these hills. I met Jesus in October 1954 in a little church in Sheffield, Illinois, with a group of young people, showing of Billy Graham film Oil Town, USA. August 1955, Youth Camp Belvedere, Illinois. God called a timid introvert to preach the gospel. And I've been preaching ever since. 17-year-old kid that couldn't stand in front of a class in high school without getting red-faced and broken up. Both my grandfathers were lay Baptist preachers, Southern Baptist. My mother prayed that one of her 6 sons would be a preacher. You know, when your mom starts praying, you need to start worrying. Moms are like that. We came here in 1967, probably the youngest preacher this church had ever hired. And we were meeting in a little building over by the YMCA. The only building that this church had ever known. And when that young punk suggests that we have to move, you know what broke loose. God did a tremendous thing. I got credit for a lot of stuff that I had nothing to do with. God had his plan for First Baptist Aledo. I happened to be there at the time when it happened. In 1969, this was a field. There were no houses. Tessie Kistler and Everett Baldwin turned over a spade of dirt. And this church came out of that. I was here when those arches were unloaded from the truck. A beautiful lady in this church shared my birthday. Lily Bodine, it was Adele's grandmother. She fell on the ice out here in this parking lot. I cradled her in my lap while we waited for the ambulance, and we both wept. I could tell you stories, but we're not here for that. It's a beautiful thing that God is doing today, Austin, I thank God for you and for Seth and all the rest. I love this congregation. That has never changed. I come this morning as a pretty weak package. So if you will pray with me, God will do something again. I'm sure. Jesus asked Peter in our passage this morning, I don't know, Pam, did we put it on this? Okay. Let's read our passage of Scripture this morning. I'm reading from Matthew, 16th chapter. Okay, let's stand, shall we? Jesus went to the territory near the town of Caesarea Philippi, where he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" Some say, "John the Baptist." They answered, "Others say, Elijah," while others say, "Jeremiah," or some other prophet. "What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." "Good for you, Simon, son of John," answered Jesus. "For this truth did not come to you from any human being, but it was given to you directly by my Father in heaven. And so I tell you, Peter, you are a rock. And on this rock foundation I will build my church, and not even death will ever be able to overcome it." You may be seated. Who do people say that I am? Well, I told you who I was. And if you had to turn to the person sitting on your right or your left and tell them who you are, without giving them your name, what would you tell them? Well, some would say, I live in Aledo, or I live in Joy, or I farm just outside of town, or I work at John Deere. Some of you might say, I'm a senior citizen, or a millennium, or whatever. Some might say, oh, I'm Jim's son, or Jim's daughter. You might identify yourself with a family connection. Some of you would say, I'm a member of First Baptist Church. Some of you are close to saying that, but you haven't said it yet. Hold that thought. I never quit. How would you identify yourself? Because that's who we are. And some people almost start out with an identification with an apology. I had the privilege of giving the graduation address on the field of our football field in 1979. And I told a Pollock story. You understand, that was a different day, people. It was a pretty good story. At that time, there was a slogan, keep on trucking. And I told the story of I'm going to say it here, and you'll make apologies for me. I'm going to use the Moreland boys. Shot a deer. And they were trying to get that deer through the timber to get it back to their pickup. And the old farmer watched them dragging that thing by the back legs. And he said, guys, you'd be a lot easier if you got all those antlers and worked it through that timber. And the Moreland boy says, yeah, that might work. And they got around on the other end of that deer, and they got a hold of the antlers, and they were moving pretty good. One Moreland boy said to the other one, yeah, this is a lot easier. Yeah, the other one said, but we're getting a long way away from that truck. It's a good story. Well, in the audience was a lady that I knew. She was a member but did not attend. And she wrote an article in the weekly paper, the Times Record. All my stories are going to be old. Anyway, she took me to task for telling the Pollock story, and she was right. But I didn't plan to make the paper just quite like that. And she said I had a style like that of Carl Reiner. Any of you ever hear of Carl Reiner? He was a top-notch crack comedian, I guess you'd call him. I don't know if she meant it for a compliment or a hillbilly put down, but whatever. When Peter told Jesus, they were putting Jesus in pretty good company. Elijah, Jeremiah, those were renowned prophets held in the highest of esteem. You see, Jesus had been doing some pretty remarkable things. He'd been healing people. He'd been making a difference in people's lives. You're all right until something starts happening. And people will interpret what's happening in their own fashion, good or bad. When we started talking about having to relocate, some of those people loved that building, and they were going to see it sold on their deathbed. Same way today. You can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't touch anybody's lives, doesn't ask for change. Change is a dirty word. I know. I'm feeling it. And I'm resisting it somewhat. I'll get along. Well, who, Peter, do you say that I am? You know, folks, you can sit in all kinds of classes and attend all kinds of churches, and you can talk about Jesus as a historical person, someone who lived a long time ago, did a lot of good stuff. But when it comes close, and Jesus looks me in the baby blue and says, who do you say that I am? Then we get a little uneasy. You see, you can be theoretical about a lot of stuff. You can be philosophical about anything. But when it comes to number one, and God is kind of like that. You'd like to keep him here. God wants to be here. And you see, there's the crux of the problem. We're all still in the control business. We want a God that we can control. We want a God that stays in his place. Several years ago, I was behind this pulpit where I normally stayed. And I had the audacity to step off the pulpit and walk down the aisle. Some of you may have been here. You could hear a pin drop. All of a sudden, I was different. I wasn't, but it felt different. And I walked down the aisle preaching. And they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know what he's going to do next. And it changed the atmosphere and the whatever in the whole building. I had comments the next week. They thought maybe I was getting Pentecostal or something. They liked it better when I was up here. That's the comfort zone. And we're sort of like that with God. Long as God stays in that nice little compartment I've got for him, that religious compartment, everything's peachy keen. But you know, we got an awesome God. And he refuses to be fenced in. You can build all kinds of walls, all kinds of ideas, but God will keep breaking out. And he'll pop into your world when you least expect it. And he wants to know, who are you? What do you think of him? Do you ever forget who you are? Maybe you aren't there. The story's told, and you probably heard it. The old guy that went to visit his friend in the nursing home, and his friend was sitting in the hallway in a wheelchair, and he got down and he said, "Do you know who I am?" The old guy looked at him and he said, "No, but the lady up at the desk will tell you." I heard of a chaplain in the military who was having poor attendance at his chapel service. Very few was coming. And so he went into the officers' club and he sat down with them and he started sharing in their stories and hoisting a few. And they found out he was a pretty nice guy. And he got to spending more time there than he was spending any place else. Oh, they thought he was the greatest. He's one of us. But he forgot who he was. He lost his identity. You ever lose your identity? Christian. But when a guy cuts you off in traffic, do you remember who you are? When the spouse is not crossing you exactly the right way, do you remember who you are? Who are you? I was picking up some carry-out at a local establishment here last week, and as I was leaving, he was sitting on the bar over there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" Well, there was a time when we didn't eat in places that served alcohol, but that changed through the years. And we enjoy the food. And I told him, I said, the food's good. You see, certain people expect certain things from you when you profess to be Christian. I was working at RCA, and it was a simple job, taking TV tubes off of one conveyor, putting them on another. But they decided that they needed to improve the production, so they speeded up the conveyors. And there were two of us doing this job. And it got to going so fast that we couldn't keep up. And the foreman said, you got to work harder, and it was got to be unsafe. These are big glass tubes. And we really applied ourselves. And we were trying, but we just could not get the job done. And he came back and he said, and you said you're a Christian. Do you see? There are things that go with titles. And sometimes it's more than a little bit challenging to fulfill the expectations of some others about who we say we are. We're living in a time when IDs are being stolen. Any of you been getting those Medicare insurance calls? Man, I got 18 one day. I don't even know how they got my name or my phone number. But somewhere, someone knew that I was over 65. That's a kind of a funny thing, isn't it? Yeah, Peter, who do you say that I am? And Peter gave a tremendous confession. You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. What a strong statement to come from Peter. And Peter was like that. You know, if Peter had been little Johnny in the classroom and the teacher asked a question, he'd be the one holding his hand. Oh, I know. That's Peter. Don't we love Peter? You know why we love Peter? Because we identify with Peter. More so than any of the disciples. I could always preach on Peter. He gave us a lot of material because he was so human. Yes, that was a strong statement. And Jesus affirmed that. He said, Peter, on that kind of faith, I'm going to build the church. Rarely did Jesus talk about the church that you and I are so concerned about and involved with and connected with and identify with. But he said to this Peter, that kind of faith, Peter, that's what will sustain and build the church. Some of you are already ahead of me. You know about Peter. You read the rest of the story. You remember the experience of Peter after Jesus was arrested. And a woman pointed her finger at Peter and said, you're one of them. No, you got the wrong person. I'm not. I don't know anything that you're talking about. You know that, Peter, don't you? Have you been there? Maybe it wasn't a woman or a little girl. Some of the translation says it was a small girl that put Peter in that disadvantaged place. In 1958, Eloise and I started a storefront church. And that's literally what it was. The Southern Baptist had a program of starting 500 churches in the state of Indiana in 5 years. And at that time, I was Southern Baptist. And we gathered in a storefront church. The first time, there were 3 of us. And the next time, there was 5 of us. That little storefront church I could tell you stories. This awesome God put his hand on a church in Texas, Austin. A church that had been given 18 acres by a family and given to the church with a stipulation that the money off of it only be used for mission work. And you know what happened? You know, they found oil on that 18 acres. Instead of $25 for rent for pasture, it was producing thousands of dollars. And one of the people in that storefront church was a nephew of an associate minister in Texas. When that church happened to be in his area, make a long story short, that little storefront church in Marion, Indiana, became the recipient of several thousands of dollars, enough to build a brand new parsonage and pay a full-time pastor a full salary for 3 years. And at that time, I was a student at Indiana Wesleyan, sophomore. Our son Steve was born while we were pastoring that little church. One of the people that came into our fellowship, helped us when we were still in the storefront, was a man by the name of Cully. I used to know his last name. And anytime we had a work time, he was there. He didn't always make it for church. But anytime there was something to do, Cully was there. And some of the other people that knew Cully said, you know, Pastor, he's an alcoholic. He's drunk half the time. But you know, God used that alcoholic to build that first building. Some of you haven't joined First Baptist because not everything in your world is perfect. If God waited for perfect people to build his church, there wouldn't be a church. You're sitting right now with a group of people that are beggars who found a place to get bread. We don't look like it, but that's who we are at our very best. And it won't ever get any better. And you can hook up and tie in here and be right at home, because that's our story. Everybody's got a story. I was pastor for 32 years. And I'm telling you, people, everyone has a story. And you may not know it, but I know a lot of them. And that's the kind of folk like Peter that he builds his church with. If you're waiting for the perfect church, don't join it, because you'll mess it up. Peter, quite a guy. I love him. The last conversation that Jesus had with Peter was after the resurrection. Peter went back to fishing. It's found in the last of John, Gospel of John, 21st chapter. I don't know why Peter went back to fishing. That's what he had done. When I was in college, a lot of the ministerial students were taking education classes. I was a double major in history and biblical literature. These guys were in pastoral duties. and education. I said, why are you taking those? And they said, well, if it don't work out preaching, we can go to teaching. That was their plan B. That man from Texas came and sat down in our trailer that we were living in when things started happening. I'm 21 years old, and he said, these people are going to want to make you pastor, but don't you do it. You stay in school, and you get your training, because God can cut wood better with a sharp axe, and that education will sharpen your axe. I've had people come into my life at pivotal times I had nothing to do with, but God used in a dramatic way to determine who I become and am becoming. I'm still getting good stuff from some people. Jesus pulled Peter out of the boat, brought him into a campfire. Have you ever noticed when you're sitting around a campfire how you get some of the best stuff? I don't understand it, but I've done it. We've done it with our kids, and it just seems to open us up a little bit. And Jesus is having a conversation with Peter, and out of the blue, he said, Peter, do you love me? Wow. Whew. He jumped into the deep end, and Peter wasn't ready to go there yet. Oh, Peter said, Lord, you know, you're just like a brother. I phileo love you. Dropped it there. A little bit later, Jesus turned again to Peter and says, Peter, do you really love me? Ooh, ouch. When your spouse asks you the second time, do you love me? You know you in deep, deep, deep water. Oh, Peter says, I really do care a great deal about you, Jesus. And you know, God is like that. When he called me to preach, it took him about a week to get through this scared kid. He said to Peter the third time, do you really agape love me, Peter? And Peter broke down. He said, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. And to be fair to Peter, he was crucified later, and he, according to tradition, was crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified like his Lord and Master. It's a simple question this morning, folk. Who are you? Are you one that loves Jesus? I mean, love, agape, loves him. Because when the chips are down and the road is rough, and it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Do you love him? And no one can answer that but you. Now, don't need to answer to me. I've had people apologize to me when they've been cursing, and I said, hey, I'm not the problem. I'm going to close. And I'm going to leave it an open question. The bands, they're going to come and we're going to sing a closing hymn. It's actually a chorus, and I requested it. Because some of you are on the outskirts, but you need to be on the inside. You need to be a part of this family. You need to be a part of God's family. Maybe Jesus has touched you and you've never really hooked up. You can do it this morning. You can do it right now here in this place. You can say yes to Jesus. I love you, Lord. I want you as my Savior. If that's something that God's dealing with you about, you clear the air. You get it settled this morning, right now. Okay. Let's sing our closing, Family of God. Would you stand?